Hello and welcome to the Dirty, Messy, Alive Embodied Memoir Writing Workshop Series. And with me right now is Traci Skuce, and we are going to be talking about writing emotion in memoir. But first, a little bit about Traci. Traci Skuce lives on the traditional and unceded territories of the Comox First Nation, and she holds an MFA in fiction from Pacific University, and her work has appeared in dozens of literary journals throughout North America. In April 2020, her short story collection, Hunger Moon, was released by New West Press and was a finalist for the Rakuten Kobo Emerging Writer Prize. Traci runs The Writing Journey, an online creative writing school for fiction and memoir writers who want to write and finish their best stories and get them out into the world. So basically all of you. Welcome, Traci.
Hi, Janelle. Thanks so much for having me here today.
Oh, I'm so curious about writing emotion in memoirs. Uh, I haven't really thought about it until I decided to invite you, and now the specificity is really intriguing me. So why don't you just dive into describing what that means?
Well, I find that, emotion is a really interesting element of writing that we don't often talk about. We talk about motivation and character and, in fiction, plot, or in memoir, the arc of the story and so on and so forth. But really, a story is an emotional journey. There is, as much as there is an external world happening to a character, and even in memoir, that I'm going to refer to the self as the character. There is also an emotional arc. So there's like the inner landscape of the memoirist, of the narrator, is really, really important to story in fiction and nonfiction. And what I find is that a lot of teaching is on the external, right? The what happened, and really story is like, well, then is the alchemy of emotion, is the alchemy of the sort of inner world and the transformation within, as I'm sure some other of your guests are going to speak of. But part of that is the emotional response and reaction of the narrator to what is happening to them, which can be hard to write because sometimes we're not in touch with our emotional truths, and we have to kind of like really get back in there and feel what was happening, or how do I feel about that now, or how do I reflect on how I felt about it then, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm thinking too about the how interesting a story gets when we're unaware of the emotional need and desire and truth that's driving us, and we think it's one thing, but the other, like, feeling based narrative humming below is working at odds to that. So how would you approach that?
Okay, if I'm understanding you correctly, it's sort of like there's a well, tension is a really important element of story. So the thing with emotion is like it's not. I'm just going to kind of go off on this
Or wherever
tangent
you
for a
want.
moment, but like we don't come in and go, I'm really angry, like again, like my night kind of, or like I'm really sad. Like there's more complexity to our experience of emotion because in our culture, in Western culture, particularly the modern world, it's like we're taught that certain emotions are not okay to feel. And so let's take, for example, um, like anger, and in a situation where say you and a spouse are in a situation and you had feelings of anger come up toward that person, but you feel like if you express them, that's bad, some sort of teaching that you've had. And so, how is that? How are you um, suppressing that emotion? There's going to be tension between the fact that it's arising and the fact that you don't want to express it, or that it's going to come out in like little prickly ways, but not a full blown kind of fire. So, so I think that oftentimes we're at odds with our emotional experience, and so that can be for really, make for really good writing. We feel one way, but we want to feel another way, or we feel one way and we want to be having another kind of experience. So I don't know if that got to your
Yeah.
underground, like, I think, and sometimes there's like the deep repression. We're just not gonna, nobody's gonna say the thing. And in memoir, particularly, like, often most of us probably grew up in family systems where there were certain things that you didn't say or weren't allowed to feel that were actually running the whole show.
Mhm.
'Cause that's usually how it
Yeah.
goes.
Yes. So let's say people listening and watching are going, yes, that's right, that's right. How would you suggest they start learning how to notice and identify, and then also practice writing these emotions and the tension of it?
Yeah, so one of the things that I really encourage is to, and I know you have embodied in your summit title, and I have a course called the Embodied Story Intensive. So really, it's the body. It's like beginning to notice and identify what you're feeling in any moment. You could use that, or recalling. So here's an exercise that people at home could try right now. You could pause the recording in a moment and give it a try, but to sit and just feel, like, try and identify, locate what you're feeling. So, if you're kind of neutral, you may want to recall a time fairly recently where you felt, say, irritated, like you couldn't find a parking spot, or something that you hoped would happen didn't happen, and just recall, like, a low stakes thing, and just recall that. Close your eyes and feel into your body. Where is that emotion expressing itself or being held? Can you give it a couple of words? Like, maybe irritation feels uh, sharp under your right ribs. Maybe that's where you're feeling it. Or maybe there's an impatience that feels like a fist behind your solar plexus. So just kind of feeling, and then writing those words down, and giving it like a sentence or two to describe it can be helpful, just as practice. Or you can go back in there and ask if there's an image that's coming. Like, I did say, like, a fist, so perhaps that's the image, or uh, the sharp feeling of irritation. I don't know, it's like a thousand pins or something like that. And just coming back to your page and kind of free writing around, like, what those emotions feel like in the body, or what images have arisen for you. And that can be just a good way to start to attend to how you're actually feeling versus what you think the emotion feels like. So our tendency is to kind of go with, or what I see in writers is go with how we think the emotion should be in the body, or um, expressed, like I was having that little tantrum, the anger, looking a particular way, when actually it might feel really really different in the body in real time. So just kind of beginning to attend to and notice how things are feeling and writing them down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, I'm thinking about this difference that, I mean, maybe this is the inner tension for writers with a writing practice, the challenge and the difference between naming a thing. She was angry. I'm angry. And then getting into the nuance of the description and the experience, which yeah, what I'm thinking about is like there's a time and a place to just state the thing.
100%.
Anger is here, and then there's a time and a place to get into the nuance. And how would you suggest people navigate, when do you tell and when do you show?
That is the $1,000,000 question. So sometimes I've been thinking about this because it's not like your everything thing has to be kind of like described like in the body, every kind of gram of the emotion brought forward onto the page. But I think about like what is the in a way in memoir, is there a presence of emotion here in this scene, and is there a processing of the emotion? So there probably, we can have something where something frightening happens in a scene or has happened to us, and we completely dissociate and shut down. So I do suggest also thinking about and learning about the nervous system, um, just in terms of like, if you don't remember what you felt like, that might be why there might have been a shutdown. So you can actually, as the older narrator, come in and say like you didn't know what you were feeling at that time, like it was, or you felt like pulled away from your body. Like that is also a valid emotional response. And then later, it may be that the emotion is processed. Why did I have that response? Or, where you're kind of unpacking it a little, which is not directly answering your question because the show and tell thing. But I think there's something there with this idea of the presence of it. So does it need to be just stated simply that anger, like that anger rose up in you and you had to express it or leave the situation? Maybe. um, there isn't a rule for like um, showing it or telling it. So I think it's really in the nuance of writing and feeling into the scene. Is there actually a presence of emotion here at all? And if I have said she was angry, is the action, is the behavior matching that? Or is it just kind of she says it and there's no feeling tone of the anger in the scene?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm now thinking about. So I just finished watching season 7 of Love Island.
Okay, I don't watch that, but
I have a 22-year-old daughter who loves talking about these shows with me, so I watch them so we can talk about them. They're actually so fascinating. But I'm thinking about emotion because the show is very emotion driven. It's all about like finding your love match, but being tested and challenged and high drama with beautiful young people who are not super aware of themselves. So that makes great television and great stories. And what really stood out to me, one of the sweet things in the show was how emotion shows up differently, of course, in by gender and by cultural background. It's an American show, but there's people from different cultural backgrounds inside of America. And what I found so interesting was there were a few scenes where, I'm in my 40s now and I'm a little smarter and wiser and more experienced with reading people than in my 20s. I would have been an absolute hot mess on that show. And these participants are in their early to mid,
Yeah.
a little bit late 20s. And so I would have misread these things as well at that age. But what was really interesting was um, seeing one woman in particular really pushing the man she was paired up with to it was clear she wanted a display of emotion as proof of emotion. And it was
Mm.
also clear that his display of emotion was the very masculine socialized response of shutting down and becoming very still in order to hold it all in, because he was feeling so much that it was quite likely he'd start to cry if anything came out. And his
Mhm.
body language, his the way he kind of stilled and retreated into a certain kind of posture indicated all of that, and she couldn't see it, and so she's pushing and getting more and more upset at her perception of his lack of emotion. Meanwhile, it's just like bubbling away inside of him and he's trying to hold it together, and the misunderstanding is like, it's so heartbreaking because it doesn't have to be that way. And I just thought that was, I mean, the other very sweet thing on that show was that actually a lot of the men did cry um, and were able to express emotion. But in these very intense situations, um, the shutdown, I think what I'm trying to say is that the story dynamic becomes so interesting with the tension of the misunderstanding and misreading of emotion as being absent, when the reality is it's really big, but it's in disguise.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's why when I say like there's this the external and the internal, like someone can present as really, really together and be falling completely apart internally. Um, yeah, like this idea of repression or suppression, like that is a valid experience of an emotional truth, like for you or for anyone, and can be, and as I said, like it's that, yeah, that relationship to it, and then you bring in this other person who has this other emotional kind of wants the performance of the expression, and the other person can't give it. So there is like um a currency almost sometimes between, like even in familial systems, right? Emotional currency, where the expectation, the mother wants you to show her the display of love. And so you perform it because you don't want to be, um, you know, cast outside the castle walls essentially. And then, but meanwhile, what you need is different from what she's demanding. And I'm making that up. My mom's not like that, but that's like that. I'm sure there are mothers like that. But yeah, so they're that becomes, the stakes become so high. I think the stakes in a story, like in memoir, is wrapped up in emotion. Like, is she gonna say the thing that she really feels? Or is she going to continue to not say it and not get what she needs or wants? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe something that viewers could consider right now is, where do you perform emotion when you're feeling something very different?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what are the motivations behind that? And where are you um, feeling kind of heartbroken, misunderstood, and unseen because you're feeling so deeply, but no one seems to be able to read it appropriately.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And how is the inner and the outer expression in yourself maybe at odds?
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. I just even think about that question that we often ask each other, like, how are you?
Oh,
Right? Which
God, I
feels
hate
like a loaded question, actually, in this day and age. And think about the different ways you can say, fine. Oh, I'm fine, or fine.
your voice goes up.
Yeah, totally. Or like, fine. or, are you really? Right. And so obviously with every person who asks you that, um, you're not going to launch into whatever's going on, but that could be a place to start, right? The way we do perform that, um, yeah, I remember at a like sort of early mid pandemic, my marriage had fallen apart and I was out, and this woman goes, hi, oh, hi, nice to see you. How are you doing? Are you good? Are you good? And I was like, actually, no, I'm not good. Just like had it with that kind of question, and that kind of like, she had a
Please
response.
be good for me.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. We do that performance thing too. So that's why I said about the nervous system, like fawning, right? Is a kind of performance, which is born out of a need to be okay. And so it's not I don't say that from a place of judgment, because I have been a super fawner in my life. But when we deny our own truth just to make the situation okay so that we can feel okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And for those who are new to the concept of fawning, it also gets called tend and befriend or placating, but is usually about putting your perception of the other person's needs first in order to manage a situation to keep yourself safe in some way. And sometimes that's very necessary, and sometimes it's become a habit that is not useful, often by the time we're adults.
Yeah.
Um, or the other person doesn't actually really want or need it, but we're trying to manage an interaction and a situation for our own needs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a pretty wild thing to learn about, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And pretty juicy for storytelling.
Totally, totally juicy for storytelling.
Hmm. Yeah. So, what would you say are the main challenges or like mistakes that you see people making when they start trying to write emotion, and the kind of shift that makes you go, yes.
Mhm. The the biggest thing I see is either there's no emotion present at all, and it's very much like a reporting of what happened, and so that need to kind of pause and check in with how was that, um, 16-year-old version of myself, what was going on for her in her interior world. So that's one. And the other one, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, the emotion is overblown. And what I mean by that is that it's kind of like, oh, I think it should have been like this, or I think it would show up in this way, versus um, like maybe some of that body work that we had, that I mentioned earlier, but also the complexity. Like emotion is complex. I was working with my writers yesterday, and one was writing about joy, and she said, the was a piece of fiction, but I thought it was so brilliant. This character is dancing, and then says, like, is this joy I'm feeling? It's almost like questioning her own experience, because it's so unfamiliar. So it's not just joy and shiny, but there's this element of like, is this joy? So like most emotions have like sort of subtler layers happening, and I find that's what writers are often missing, that kind of nuance of expression.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It occurs to me as well that there's likely in personal experience and personal stories a really liberating moment where you find where you finally recognize behaviors, actions, thoughts, um, and name them appropriately as the emotion they are instead of something tangential and sideways to the core. Because I'm just to use a personal example, uh, anger was such a thing I wasn't allowed to feel.
Yeah, me
I
too.
was very angry when I was younger, and so it came out in sideways ways because and it was tamped down so tight in me that it came out as like chronic fatigue in my 20s because I learned later I was working so hard to hold that down and not acknowledge or feel it because it felt dangerous to feel, and that took a lot of energy to do. And then so the anger would seep out sideways, and other people would say something like, "You're angry," and I was like, "No, I'm not. It's because of this, this, and this." So on my own healing journey, the point at which I understood there was anger and I recognized it and I felt it was incredibly um, liberating and changed my self perception. And then also, um, starting to feel the anger put me on a new path because then I was feeling it and had
Mm-hmm.
to learn how to manage that energy. Suddenly it wasn't out here,
Mm-hmm.
all the things everyone else was doing, but it was like, oh, wow, oh, whoa, this force is in here. And now I have more energy. I don't have
Yeah,
chronic fatigue
yeah.
anymore, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so that, like, I guess that would be interesting for a story too, is the moment when you recognize something real and true in yourself that has been denied that is related to emotion.
Hmm. As you're saying that, thank you for sharing that. Like, even a prompt could be, I didn't know it then, but,
Mm,
right?
mm,
I didn't know it then, but, and it's so true. And I think that's why memoir is really interesting. It's like you have that distance to see that younger self and all the inner, like it does, we do have to, particularly women have been taught to like manage these energies because like good girls don't feel angry and good girls don't whatever, or whatever the story is, but the conditioning is real, and it does, that repression is real. And so as I was saying earlier, like we may not have access to it in the moment, or like, if you went back and you felt into that young woman in your 20s, like that your relationship to anger is very different than it is now. And so, I didn't know it then, but right. And the ways that it was, that it, so you might describe the ways that you were holding it in, so that could be really interesting too.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And for those who is like, repression's not been my problem, you could look at the ways in which you were like uncontained and just flooding everything out all the time.
Yeah, yeah,
And I didn't know it then, but was there a point at which you started being able to
yeah.
hold a little more?
Boundaried. Yeah.
Yeah, boundaries are an issue in both those experiences.
Totally, totally, totally.
Navigate like the appropriate banks of the river to the flow of your emotional energy.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love that image.
So, is there anything else you wanted to add or offer in this exploration of writing emotion in memoir?
Um, I think that like there's so much to it, and it just keeps like it's a very layered process. And so to really just I think what is important for writers, if you do any of that kind of feeling into the body, that part of repression or suppression can be this like denial or not wanting to feel. So, like trusting that the emotion you feel is real, because a lot of us weren't validated as kids that our emotional experiences are like, oh, you're fine, like you're fine. Um, so that's been a big one for me, is to trust my emotional experience as valid. And I still am working on it. So, trusting, and that includes um, like just around the writing itself, and it can be, we can hear those critics and that conditioning that says, oh, this story isn't worth it, or this story sucks, or that kind of, like, we haven't talked about that, and I'm sure you get to that in other parts of the summit. But um that's not the voice I'm saying to trust, but like that if you have an emotional experience, to just trust that it is worthy of your care and attention. It is worthy of your care and attention. And it doesn't mean, um, yeah, it is worthy of your care and attention. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, that's a good point to
Yeah, yeah,
close the exploration on. So for folks that want to get closer to your work and learn more, how
yeah.
can they do that? What do you do in the world?
I have a embodied story starter kit, which you can start with, and that it is a free offering. It has a number of videos and prompts and so on to just kind of get you familiar with my approach to the work, and to what it is to be working with the body in story. And then I do also have a 6 month embodied story intensive, so that you could just get on if you join with the starter kit, you'll get to know me through newsletters. I offer weekly prompts and little videos and that sort of thing. So it's a rich community. I also have a free um, community for writers, so that you would learn about that through the starter kit. So
Mhm. And you can just scroll below the video to click the button to get that starter kit. And then you also have a great offering for the all access pass.
yes, it is um, a little workshop called Keep Your Readers Reading. So it's a fun little 2 hour, I think it's 2 hour workshop that I did with Emma Desi. And yeah, you can just enjoy that as a way to juice up your writing.
And that is available by scrolling down as well. If you're already an all access pass holder, just go down to the bonuses. And if you're not, you can still sign up for this pass and a whole bunch of other bonuses from all the writers. Thank you,
Awesome.
Traci.
Oh, thank you so much, Janelle.